every business always contributes to peace in the societies.
What about international laws? The effectiveness of international laws. International laws don't seem to be playing any role in this conflict. Can these international laws be put into force or they are failing completely in the face of war?
International law was invented in order to minimize wars and conflicts, try to minimize conflicts and wars.
How do you see the role of organizations like United Nations, UN, because they were also entrusted with this whole idea of stopping wars, and all the countries came together. If you have to give a suggestion to UN, like this is probably a good definition of peace for next 20 years, right?
Every human being has inside him or herself a connection to this idea of what peace actually is. Peace is the substance of any positive impact. Peace is the only non-religious concept that answers the question of what we want.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Today we have Tilman Bauer joining us to discuss about peace. Currently, the scenario that is there in playing out in the world, right, where we see a lot of wars and lot of problems, conflicts. It is very, very important that we should champion peace. And how can we create situations where we see lesser and lesser of wars and more of peace, right? So Tillman is the founder of Peace.fi. He is a business peace initiative. He has been kind of working very closely on that. He's passionate about peace. He has done a lot of research also on that. Tillman, please welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here.
Please give us a very brief introduction about you before we start our discussion.
Yeah, sure. So I founded the Business Peace Initiative, or in short, BPI, because it turns out that every business always contributes to peace in the societies where it operates, whether it knows it or not, whether it's conscious of it or not. Secondly, it turns out that the more ethical a company is, the more ethically a company operates, the more peace it generates. And finally, the more peace a company generates, the more enterprise value, in other words, financial profits, it also creates for itself. So this is something that most people have not heard before, yet it's a research-based fact. You mentioned I have done academic research on this topic. I did a PhD in this area. And it's something that most people haven't heard of, yet it's a fact. And this is my passion, indeed, to bring this message out into the world.
Sure. That's a very, very interesting idea because generally, there are two conversations, right? Some people prefer pressure, right? Pressure and conflict-based growth, and some go in the way of making peace where they do a cultural changes and kind of mindset changes. And so I believe today we are going to focus on peace. So Tillman, I think the first question that we wanted to discuss is, considering the international situation that we are observing right now, whether it is Russia and Ukraine or in the Gulf countries, whatever is happening, one question that is in the mind of every person is like, what about international laws, the effectiveness of international laws? Because international laws don't seem to be playing any role in this conflict. And can these international laws be put into force or they are failing completely in the face of war, particularly by stronger countries like Russia and USA?
So before I answer, I would like to tell your audience that I'm a peace researcher focusing on peace and not on war. So many peace researchers study also wars and conflicts, etc. I chose to focus entirely on the positive side. So if you have a scale from minus 100 and to 0, and 0 refers to no conflict or no war, and then 100 plus 100 refers to the maximum theoretical amount of peace, whatever that might be, then I'm entirely focused on the area from 0 to plus 100. I don't focus on the negative side of the scale at all. In other words, I try to answer the question, how can we be more good as humans? How can we do more good? How can we have more peace rather than less conflicts or less wars. As to international law, so I'm not an expert on this topic of law per se or international law, but what I can say is that international law has its roots in a Hobbesian worldview. So you might have heard of Thomas Hobbes, who philosopher some hundreds of years ago, who promoted the idea that we as human beings are essentially bad. That if you give humans freedom, then we just end up in chaos. And therefore, this thing called international law was invented in order to minimize wars and conflicts. Now, it is important to keep in mind that this was an alternative approach to another approach, which did not think that human beings are essentially bad, but that human beings are essentially good. And this alternative worldview, in the 1600s, there was a philosopher called Émeric Crusay. He proposed a worldwide union, or a peaceful union through, or a kind of a global union of trade, which would, in his view, ensure peace. So the idea that business or trade contributes to peace in the positive sense is hundreds and hundreds of years old, or even older, you might argue. And in the last few hundred years, it's clear that the Hobbesian worldview has, for now, won the debate. So we don't have today the mindset that we can live in a world where there's no war or no conflict at all. Rather, we live in a world where we try to minimize conflicts and wars. Now, and that's, again, how international law was born and many of the institutions around it. However, I personally strongly believe that when we look for something, that's where our energy flows. So the more we look for something, the more we find it. In other words, I try to bring into societal discussions the message that we should aim for peace rather than not for war.
Okay, that's very interesting. And so what we understand is like there are essentially two worldviews here, where one says that human beings are good, and so probably if we let them, kind of have their way, nothing bad will happen. But there is this other worldview that probably chaos can happen if human beings have their way completely, and that's why we need some kind of laws, and that is where international laws were created, and that view has been accepted, and all the laws have came into place. However, the futility, or you say the effectiveness of those laws, is yet to be seen, because it's not 100% effective, because we see wars still, we see conflicts. But as you mentioned, right, probably the best way to deal with this is to focus on peace. If you have all your energy, all your attention towards this single idea, that how to not have conflicts, how to be peaceful, how to have relationships where you prioritize peaceful coexistence, then probably this question of conflict and war will automatically get solved. That's very interesting take on this. Continuing on those same lines, another question that I had in my mind is how do you see the role of organizations like United Nations, UN, because they were also entrusted with this whole idea of stopping wars, and all the countries came together to unite against this conflict, right? But lately, even UN seems to be failing, right, at stopping wars, whether it's Russia, Ukraine war, or the war in the Gulf countries. Do you have any views on that?
Yeah, well, it's important to keep in mind that the United Nations, or UN in short, was born after the Second World War with the intention to never again see atrocities like that committed by human beings. So I think, given the way history of the last few hundred years went, I think the UN has done overall still a great job. It's of course it can be criticized,
Okay.
but I tend to not be critical when we look into the past. However, also connecting to what I said earlier, I feel that humanity has grown and developed, and I feel that we as society are ready for a new system, in which we don't focus on what we don't want, but we focus on what we do want. And I think the United Nations has an outdated definition of peace, to be frank. They talk about peace building, which, this is just an example, which suggests that peace is something that we build as if it were a house, right? But state-of-the-art peace research from the last 20 years shows that peace is something so much more than something that just can be built one brick at a time. Instead, we talk about peace being transrational. What it means is that yes, we as human beings, we are rational. First of all, peace requires a perceiving subject, right? And secondly, once we as humans perceive peace, then yes, we are rational, but we are so much more than just rational. We are also emotional, we are spiritual, frankly, sometimes we are quite irrational. But we have all these desires and wishes and conflicts of interest or conflicting interests, and state-of-the-art peace research teaches that when we have first of all, having a conflict is part of human nature, right? If you and I have one banana and we both want the banana, then we have a conflict. But what we need to learn is to deal with that conflict in a constructive way. So, for instance, we might say, if you have initially negative energy around a conflict, what we need to do is to transform the conflict. So a better term would be conflict transformation, so that positive energy arises out of that initial negative energy. So the UN is fundamentally based on outdated or old definitions of peace. We needed those institutions in the last decades, but I think it's time to move on. And my personal work argues that the thing called business, everything that we consider business, whether it's a small kiosk on the corner of the street or global corporations, they are, to the extent that they act ethically, the biggest contributors to peace, or in fact, to the plurality of many pieces in the world.
Sure. Okay. And so there are a couple of interesting observations that we have made. I think that is where the struggle is, because let's say somebody wants to discuss peace, right? What's the vocabulary that you have to use to discuss peace? One is United Nations definition of peace, which you described, right? Which is more like building blocks where you do a couple of things step by step and then you can say there is peace. It may be useful in certain transition period where, let's say, a war-ridden country is now going towards peace, and they are making certain, let's say, government changes and process changes, but that definition is very, very limited in the end. On the other hand, what you mentioned, right, because the definition of peace has to come from human beings, human behavior. It has to encompass human behavior because, as you mentioned, human beings are emotional. They are perceiving beings, right? They sense what is happening around them and they act or react based on what they sense. And whole action and reaction, when they are in the right place, there will be peace, right? So obviously, the definition of peace, as you know, described by UN, is more made up by different kind of how should I say, based on certain criteria, based on certain kind of I think the way they want to implement or measure, more from measurability point of view probably, rather than going too deep into human psyche understanding. But the need of the hour is probably understanding human behavior and this kind of deriving your idea of peace, because if you don't do that, then a definition of peace may not last long, right? The way we are seeing what is happening in the world, if we don't go deeper inside our minds, inside our hearts, this superficial definition of peace is not going to hold long. Since you have also researched around peace a lot, right? Like if you have to give a suggestion to UN, like this is probably a good definition of peace for next 20 years, right? What would that be? That would be very
Mm.
interesting to hear.
Wow, that's a great question. So, one of the reasons why I got interested in this thing called peace in the first place is that, on the one hand, it's incredibly vast. We have literally entire libraries full of books only about peace. On the other hand, we also have, I think, every human being has or can at least find inside him or herself a connection to this idea of what peace actually is rather than what peace is not. So,
Right.
uh, if you ask, especially in the Western, especially in Western societies, what is peace, then I think we have been conditioned to answer that peace is the absence of war or the absence of violence. But then you ask, no, 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 but what does peace really mean? Not, don't give me the answer that you've been taught to give, but answer yourself. And then, once people allow themselves to let go and really feel, then you start getting all kinds of beautiful answers. For one person, peace might be walking in nature. Another person might reference meditation or spirituality, or maybe having a cup of coffee, or maybe having a pizza with your spouse, or maybe you really feel like, finally, when your favorite sports team won the championship, right? So you might really feel, why would that be peace as well? Well, because you feel it's done, we did it. It's done. No
Right.
more worries, no more doubts. No, there's certainty that we won. Everything is all right. So these few examples that I mentioned show how peace can be understood in so many different ways. Now, from a more academic perspective, what I actually did is that I started noticing that whatever term I took, anything that we as humanity, as society, consider desirable or positive, let's say nutrition, health, justice, equality, food, entertainment, whatever it is. And I did that, I combined that positive search term with peace, and I searched for academic research. Then,
Okay.
without exception, I found studies how that one thing, whatever I was searching for, somehow through certain mechanisms contributes to peace. So if you have like this large number of different understandings that this is what contributes to peace, no, it's not this, but this and this and this and this and this and this, and people tend to think that these alternative views are competing with each other. And I started wondering, but hang on, what if these competing views of peace or on peace are not competing, but all simultaneously true? And that's when I came up with my definition of peace. Peace is the substance of any positive impact. So that is the in my book, which is, can you, no, you cannot see it. It's let me just grab it here. This is my book here. It's about 400 pages long, and out of the 400 pages, the single biggest or longest chapter was about 60 pages long, on one question only: what is peace? And in those 60 pages, I basically prove that peace is the substance of any positive impact. So, to phrase that
Okay.
in a little bit more ordinary language, whenever we as humans do something positive, something desirable, then peace is the outcome.
Okay. Okay. That's very interesting. So what we are essentially saying here is, and that's very interesting research, that out of peace, when you are at peace, then you will be doing positive things, and the outcome itself would be peaceful in that case, right? In a way, but when we are full of conflicts, right, like we are under stress or we are not healthy, both physically and mentally, then probably our actions will also be in that direction. Whereas if we are feeling positive, if we are at rest, if we are relaxed and if we have good relationship, then whatever we would be doing, peace will be kind of substance of it. Is that what we're saying?
No, I think what you said is very interesting, and I don't know, but it sounds like you might be right. But it's not exactly what I said. What I said was kind of just turning it a little bit around. What I said is that when you do something that somehow creates somewhere a positive impact,
Okay.
then you have more peace. So let's say a simple example: if you are hungry and you eat, then you
Mm-hmm.
have more peace as an
Okay.
outcome, as a result.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. So whenever we do things which take us into a positive direction, we emit positive energy,
Yes,
and then there is more peace. And
yes.
obviously, the opposite would also be true. Like if we do something which creates negative things, negative impact, probably we are kind of reducing the peace around us.
Absolutely. And let me give you one more kind of it's a story basically, or a metaphor, to explain this a bit better. Let's just imagine, especially now with Elon Musk talking about Mars, and this is actually not anymore necessarily so hypothetical. I think we might come to this question. Let's say we'll arrive on Mars. Is there peace? Or right now, if you imagine right now the state of Mars, is there peace? The answer is absolutely not. First of all, there is no human to perceive it. But even if you now yourself you beam yourself to Mars
Mm-hmm.
and you look around, you die the second you arrive. If you don't die on impact, then you die 1 second later because there's no oxygen.
Right,
So the
right,
very first thing to have peace is oxygen,
right.
right?
Okay, okay.
Now, second, uh, if there's oxygen, do you then have peace? Well, no, because you probably freeze or burn to death or something.
Mm-hmm.
So still not that much peace. So you
Mm-hmm.
need some atmosphere. You need housing.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's say you have a little tent which actually keeps you alive for a day. Do you then have peace on Mars? Not that much, I think, because you're still gonna be hungry after a few hours, so you need some food, you need
Right.
water, plus you're not gonna be that peaceful if you know you die tomorrow, right?
Right.
And then let's continue the
Sure.
story. Let's continue a bit further. Let's say you have food and you can survive on Mars, let's say a few months or even years. But, eventually you might wanna have some entertainment. Because if you're bored to death, you're
Mm-hmm.
not gonna feel like, peaceful. No. And then let's say you wanna have children. You bring in your children, but you cannot put your children anywhere. Now, kindergartens, schools. So in the end, we realize that all the infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
or institutions that we as society have built to make this society work are things that we need for peace. Just imagine if chairs would disappear from your own society overnight. We'd be on the
Mm-hmm.
barricades. We would say, government, give us our chairs back. So
Right.
a chair producer makes a significant contribution to peace, obviously times the company's market share.
Right. That's very interesting point. So what we're saying is human beings have naturally evolved towards creating more peace. Of course, there are other behaviors also, but in general, when we work, when we do certain things, right, when we progress, and this progress is essentially to create peace in our mind, because if we wouldn't have done what we have done, we would probably be less peaceful. And peace is not entirely a construct of the mind. Our physical surrounding, our atmosphere is a big contributor to it. If our environment where we live is not, conducive to our good health, or let's say conducive to our good relationships, that would also mean that we will not be peaceful. So just trying to kind of continue on the same lines. So our environment, the basic physical environment, has to be conducive to our health, and then of course our relationships in our mind has to be at peace. Then only we can be at peace overall. You also touched upon the fact that human beings have evolved pretty much, and probably it's a good time to kind of understand these more deeper ideas of peace rather than kind of stick to something superficial, which might be helpful, but in the end might be a bit too bookish.
Yes, yes, I think you put it very well. You also referred to the mind. So the psychology of peace is, of course, very important. How do we build a culture of peace? And if one of the UN organizations says that if conflicts and wars always start in the minds of men, in other words, human beings, then peace also always starts in the minds of humans. So I think that's important to keep in mind. But on the other hand, I would also like to mention that peace is not black or white. So right now we might be at peace. We might not have any major issues in our lives. We have food, we have clothing, we have electricity, we have internet, we have a computer, we have a microphone, we can talk, we have LinkedIn so that we were able to connect. The sun is shining, spring is here, etc. But let's say maybe the chair is a bit uncomfortable, right? So this is not the case, but this is a fictional example. Then maybe there's something that bothers me a little bit, which makes me to have a little bit less peace. And if I fix that issue, or let's say I'm hungry and I eat something, then we have a little bit more peace. So I would just like to remind the audience that yes, small things can increase peace, but it always starts in the mind. So yes, if you have a desire to have more peace, then we take action, and that action can be physical action, or it can also be something that I call spiritual action. So, for instance, through meditating or praying, those can be actions in a certain sense, because we find perhaps through our intuition, depending on how religious you are, or if you are entirely atheist, then I would say through your own imagination, through your own creativity, you find new approaches to your situation, whatever it is, to have more peace in the end.
Very interesting. And I think people who are watching this, it must be a food for thought for them. Like if they want to explore peace, where can they get started at least? Peace is a, I think, deep topic. The more you go into it, the more you will learn. I think it's so, but I think if things are in order, then you will be peaceful. Probably that is what where we're getting at. Like if your physical health is in order, if your, as I mentioned, also the mind is in order, then you are at peace. And to get that to order, you will have to make some effort, some most of the times, and that effort will be, kind of the output of that effort is peace probably. And
Yes,
interesting. And
but at the same
and
time,
you
if I
also,
may,
yeah.
if I
Go
may
ahead.
interrupt for 1 second, I would like to mention also that in my research, I argue that every action, or I talk in the context of business, every company, in other words, every piece of work that is done by a person, um, somewhere has, if it has a reason to exist, then it already contributes to peace. Now, I'm not saying that the net impact is always positive in terms of peace, because if the action is unethical, then there might also be a negative peace impact. But what I am saying is that there's always some positive impact positive peace impact somewhere. So whatever you do, whether you work as a manager or secretary or cleaner or podcast host or engineer or whatever, right? You are, this is, I can say with 100% certainty, somewhere, somehow contributing to peace. And now my service is to help you as a company or as a person identify and measure your peace impact. And then when we identify and measure your peace impact, we can think how to grow your peace impact and thereby make yourself more valuable for society, which in turn leads also to you or to you as a company to earn more money.
Sure. So that's very interesting. So what we're saying is when businesses exist with a purpose or with this ethical intent in mind, right, they also contribute a lot to the peace. I think the easiest way is by giving jobs to people and kind of creating livelihood for them. But what
Yeah.
may seem obvious is actually a big, base for creating peace. And if you are more intentional about it, right, then probably, guys like you can help businesses to kind of be more oriented around, let's say, measurability of peace and impact. And if you have some good intentions in mind, if you already own a business and you want to kind of contribute towards peace or towards society in general, probably a little bit of, more organized approach may be even more helpful, and it may make you even more efficient. Okay, that's very interesting. Okay. So Tilman, I think moving towards the next question, I know you mentioned already that you are not an expert in legal or let's say reporting, etc. But looking at the human rights situation, right, in the world that we often see in news and all, and often we get disturbed by watching all that, right? So how do you see that? What do you think should happen immediately to awaken people up towards, peaceful measures?
Okay, so I think step number one is to identify what we want. What's the goal? And I think if
Okay.
we talk on an individual level, then the answer might be anything, right? You might have one goal, another person might have a completely different goal.
Mm-hmm.
Health, you might want to get healthy, you might want to make more money, you might want to heal your relationship with your spouse, or find a spouse, or find a girlfriend, find a boyfriend, whatever. As an individual, you might have any goals whatsoever. But as a researcher, I'm interested in, the ultimate essence of things. I believe that, and this is another reason why I started studying peace, is because peace is the only non-religious concept. So if you talk about religion, then we can talk about God, which is even bigger. But if we, as a in a research or in an academic environment, we often need to be non-religious, or in a business environment, we need to be non-religious, or we don't want to talk that much about religion. Let's put it that way. Then I ask myself, what is the non-religious concept? Or I'm answering the question. Peace is the only non-religious concept that answers the question of what we want, and at the same time is applicable, and this is crucial, is applicable to any context, any culture, in any time, across humanity. Let me say that again. Peace is the only concept in the world, in the history of humanity, that every culture, every society always wants. And that's the reason why I suggest that the answer to what we want should be or must be peace,
Okay.
because it fits across contexts and cultures. Now, what peace means in each context or culture, of course, can differ. In the context of your spouse, peace might mean not, having a romantic date, versus, for a company like Microsoft, peace might mean, having selling an operating system that works well and, doesn't break and doesn't, etc. So peace can mean different things. But okay, to answer your question, step number one is we as society need to become aware of the fact that we need to be conscious of the fact that we want peace. Secondly, we need to be aware and conscious of the fact that we already create peace so much in our daily lives. But then the third step is to identify how we do that. How do you personally, dear audience member, how do you create peace in your daily working life, in your daily life, wherever you are? And then the step after that is to, when you've identified that, how you create peace, then we can think about how we can increase that peace impact. And I think if we as society start being aware of this amazingly large and wonderful concept of peace, then we will automatically also have more peace, because where energy flows, energy goes.
Right. Okay. So what we are saying is essentially you have to move towards a direction of peace. That's the only way you can kind of solve all these issues that we are observing. Prioritize kind of peace, give a lot of importance, a lot of attention to it, be intentional about it, and as you mentioned, be conscious about it. Don't probably assume that it will happen completely automatically. You have to become a little bit more oriented around it, and you have to tell yourself that, okay, I want peace. If you tell this to yourself, it will start materializing on its own, probably. That's the message that we are giving. And of course, we are not denying the problems that exist today. We are not denying the conflicts that we are living in there or that we are seeing around. There is a very interesting story about long old story. I think that is coming to my mind, where Akbar asks his fellow Birbal, like, there is this stick, okay, and can you make it smaller without breaking it, without damaging it, without erasing it? And what Birbal does it, he draws a big line in front of the stick, okay, and that stick becomes smaller when compared to the big line, right? So I think that is what we had doing here, rather than kind of trying to reduce conflict or wars. We are saying give importance to peace automatically, and when there is peace, and when you see the value in it, see the satisfaction it creates, the and how it connects with our true nature, you will automatically start kind of getting disillusioned with conflict and war, and people will lose interest in that, and this will probably establish itself, because human beings are born to be peaceful, right? That's what our, I believe, the deepest belief is, right, when we are kind of discussing all this. And that's what came to my mind. you know uh,
Absolutely. I think it's a very, very beautiful and suitable summary of our whole conversation. And, of course, I don't want to leave your audience alone with this. It is my passion to help as many people as I can. And honestly, I didn't plan this. So this is an idea that comes to my mind right now. To your audience members, anybody who sends me an email and mentions your name, Pradeep Mishra, gets automatically 50% discount of all my services. I don't promise that this will be the case forever, but at least, let's say this year.
sure. Okay.
So I really can help people and companies to identify what their positive impact on society is.
Okay.
In other words, what the peace impact is, and then to increase that peace impact and thereby make more money. So I really would love to serve your audience, and I'm grateful for this amazing conversation.
Thanks, Tilman. I think the audience who is watching, please grab the opportunity. I mean, Tilman is very good at his services, and you know, and if both of you are intentional, obviously, good things can happen. And Tilman, I think we are on to our last question, and then we can wrap up this discussion. Your views on what role different countries and the leaders of those countries can play to solve, various crises that we see together and create lasting peace.
So I think many of the things I've already said answer this question, right? Focus on what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on that what you want, and then build that. Just to add maybe one more point for clarification, I mentioned earlier in the beginning of our conversation the scale from -100 to +100. In some countries, I don't want to mention any names here, but there are countries where freedom of speech, where equality, democracy, things like that, human rights are not realized, cannot be experienced on the level where they should. In other words, from -100 to 100 to +100, we are still on the negative side of things. So, and when I mentioned that I focus on the positive side of the scale, then that has been my decision, and I focus on tools and kind of ideas or theories, or kind of, yeah, I think tools is the best word. I build tools for that side of the scale. Having said that, if you find yourself on the negative side of us on of the scale, then of course those issues need to be solved. You must have human rights. You must have equality, and then keep the vision for peace in mind.
Right. Sure, Tilman. I think that's a very, very interesting and important discussion that we just had. And to all the audience who is watching this, please take note and drop your suggestion, drop your comments about what you think about this discussion. And I hope this discussion brings more peace into your life. Then, any last words that you want to say, and then we can wrap up this discussion.
Please include my email address in the show notes, inbox@tilmanbauer.eu. And I said, please do send me an email. I don't know how many millions will now contact me. So if it's a million emails tomorrow, I might not respond immediately, but I will certainly do my best. If I don't answer within a week, please do send me a reminder. And let's talk how I can help you further on this common journey towards more peace. Thank you.